Good morning. Welcome. Glad you're here. My name is Landon. I'm one of the pastors here. We're doing a series called The Point of Impact. Well, there it is. That was amazing. And we are giving to people all over the world and showing the love of Jesus to people everywhere. And I've been blown away by what you guys have done so far. Does anyone remember this guy? His name is Roland Stewart. He was on TV a ton in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. He was born in Spokane, Washington in 1944, and he was always kind of like an interesting guy from square one. He had like a rough childhood. Both of his parents passed away, and he kind of dove headfirst into his hobbies. He tried to grow the world's largest mustache, which I think is a worthy pursuit. He also he became a pot farmer. Christians are like, how do we react to that? Boo, applaud. What are we supposed to do in 2022? And then he had this idea, as he was watching sports on TV, that he could get on television by sitting in the right seats and getting in the mix on that. His quote was this: "I had watched television, seen all the angles, and saw a person could stand in the background in all of these shots and become instantly known. I had a dream in technology. I needed a magnet. To stand there as a person would be fine, but I could do twice as good if I had a color scheme or something." So he adopted this rainbow wig, John 3:16 t-shirt, and John 3:16 sign, because shortly after he started doing this, Roland Stewart became a Christian. He was watching online or on TV a pastor preach, and he gave his life to Christ. And I don't know if John 3:16 was in the mix when, yeah, you're going to want to see how the story goes before you applaud. And he was watching, at some point he got this verse, John 3:16. He was like obsessed with it. Do you know this verse? It's like the first verse typically that people hear or learn as a Christian. It's also like the one that are in all of those stories that pastors say that when you hear them, you're like, I don't think that really happened. You know, like when you're hearing a sermon and the guy is on the train, person comes up, bumps into him, the Bible falls out of his hand, opens on the ground right to John 3:16. Person picks it up, hands it back to the pastor and says, "What must I do to be saved?" And you're just listening to the sermon, you're like, I don't think that was a thing that ever happened once to anyone ever. John 3:16 says this, that God so loved the world. God doesn't hate the world, he loves the world. God loved the world so much that he gave something that you would never give. He gave his only son so that anyone who believes in him, Jesus, will never die, but will live forever. That's what it says. And this apparently impacted Roland Stewart so much that he changed his whole TV persona to match this, and he started holding up a sign everywhere that said John 3:16. He was on TV all of the time. He was at the 1977 NBA Finals, the 1979 Major League All-Star Game, the World Cup, the Indy 500, the Kentucky Derby, the Olympics, and the wedding of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, which I think is a bit excessive, the wedding one. I don't know if you've seen the Bridezilla's Reddit thread, but if you have free time this afternoon, you're going to be very entertained with the content on that thread. I don't think that you're a bridezilla if you say that you don't want someone wearing a rainbow wig and holding up a Bible verse at your wedding. It's kind of just about you. But this guy was always drawing attention to himself and this verse. It was so intense. He would drive all over the country. He said that he drove 60,000 miles a year, and that sometimes he would get more TV FaceTime than the network announcers, who also left him tickets. He would bring a battery-operated television into the stadium so that he could watch and see when he was on television. He was joked about on Saturday Night Live. Christopher Walken played him. And he was also on the show The Simpsons, which is braggable, even if they're mocking you. And there he is right there holding up the John 3:16 sign. And then things started taking kind of a worse turn for Roland Stewart. Someone on sportscasting.com said, while his appearance was fun for fans, sports broadcast directors and producers weren't happy to see the Rainbow Man. They thought his fandom was too much and oftentimes spoiled the most dramatic of sports moments. One golf producer told ESPN in the 1980s that he insisted that his cameramen avoid showing Roland Stewart or risk being fired. And so people were stopping to stop. They just didn't want to put him on TV anymore because he was distracting from things. And then his whole life was falling apart. He had some problems in his marriages. His fourth wife claimed that he choked her after the 1986 World Series because she didn't hold up the John 3:16 sign correctly, which would be funny if it wasn't so horribly ironic. He ran out of money to drive to all the stadiums and became homeless. He started figuring out new ways to attract attention to himself. He started throwing stink bombs at various Christian events. He went to the Crystal Cathedral, which is a church. He went to Trinity Broadcast Network and threw a stink bomb. And when people asked him why he did that, he said, quote, "God thinks this stinks." At the 1991 Masters, he blew an air horn while Jack Nicklaus was preparing to putt and then threw a stink bomb onto the course. And Christians are like, but I don't get, why don't people like us? He started saying that Jesus was coming back in 1992. And then his life took an even darker turn in September 1992 when he locked himself in a hotel room near the Los Angeles airport. He pulled a gun on a maid who then locked herself in the bathroom. And during the 8.5-hour standoff with the police, he threatened to shoot at planes unless they gave him a 3-hour live press conference on all 3 major TV networks. He was caught, convicted, tried, and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, where he is currently serving at the Mule Creek State Prison, which is an hour southeast of Sacramento. He's been denied parole 3 times in the last 6 years. He said in an interview, "I come up for parole every year now, and I don't know why they always say no." I think I know. I think I know why. Which brings up an interesting point. If this guy knew John 3:16, based his entire life around its words, it becomes abundantly clear that just knowing things about God, just knowing Scripture, just knowing what the words say, doesn't mean that you know Christ. In fact, you start to realize that a lot of people know things about the Bible, but perhaps don't know Jesus, because the Bible says that when you truly know Jesus, you truly show Jesus. It says that here, first, here's this idea. Everybody knows John 3:16, but how do we know that we know the God of John 3:16? How do you know that you don't just know things about God, but you actually know God? Well, we see that here in 1 John 3:16, which makes it easy to remember. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. He's saying, here's how you know that you know love. You know Jesus' love, you know what he did, and you show Jesus' love by doing what he did. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? He's saying if you know about God's love, but you don't show God's love, how do you really know it? If you say you know it, but you don't show it, how do you know it? You know that you know it when you show it. Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. He's saying you know that you know love when you don't just say things about love, but when you what? Show it. I made these 3 verses into some word math problems for you to show you what the text says. Does that sound good? Don't worry, it's not like intense math or anything, which I couldn't do anyway. I'm terrible at math. Anybody else bad at math? My parents sent me to a Christian grade school for 9 years, and I'll tell you what Christians aren't good at is teaching intense mathematics to young children. And anyways, I went to a public high school. They had a placement test. I didn't have the TI-86 calculator, and so I filled out the questions randomly on the math portion, and then apparently I did amazing because they put me in advanced geometry, and then after one semester, they were like, nah, so I got demoted in math. And anyways, here's some word math problems for you. Here's what John is saying. Knowing love equals knowing what Christ did. That's pretty obvious. That's pretty easy, right? Showing love equals doing what Christ did. Does that make sense from the text? Knowing love does not equal knowing what Christ did minus doing what Christ did. And this is where a lot of Christians get mixed up. They think that they can verbally say, I know Jesus, then not show him to anyone, and that all works and makes sense. Is that not the number one criticism of Christians, and in my opinion, the most fair one? Is not the number one criticism of Christians, they go to church, but they don't show love in their neighborhood? They go to church, but they don't show love to people who think differently than them, vote differently than them, talk differently than them? Is that not the fairest criticism of Christians? Dare I say the H word? Hypocrite. People who say that they know the greatest love in the world and yet are either incapable or unwilling to show the greatest love in the universe to the people that are around them. John's saying love does not equal talking. A lot of Christians think that by saying words and saying things, you've achieved or accomplished what God has asked you to do. Saying words is great, and it's a significant part of life and communication and loving people. But it's not the only part. He says that love equals truth and action. You know that you love when you show the love. When you truly know love, you genuinely show love. And are these not the greatest Christians in the world? And just the greatest people? They deeply and irrevocably know the love of God. And so they genuinely, completely, and constantly show the love of God to anybody. Anybody who wants it, anybody who needs it, anybody who asks for it, regardless of any of the categories that make people not want to love someone else. The guy that wrote this was John the Apostle from the Bible, not John the Baptist. Those guys are different. I do like John the Baptist, though, because he had weird clothes and he ate locusts. Have you ever read that part? It's really cool. He would be a pretty good icon for anyone who's both a Christian and a vegan. That'd be a great character for that center of that Venn diagram, however many people that is. Anyways, the guy that wrote this was John the Apostle. And John the Apostle was one of Jesus' best friends, and he was one of the people who was closest to Jesus. And he wrote John 3:16, and he also wrote 1 John 3:16. He wrote all of the verses that we looked at together today. And in the beginning of his book, John chapter 1, it's one of the best chapters in the whole Bible. I don't know if anybody else is a Bible geek like me, but you get your spots that are your favorite spots, you know? And John chapter 1 is it's got to be one of the best in the whole Bible. It's the one that goes, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him, Jesus, was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome it. But then it keeps going on, and it gets to this really cool part where it says that Jesus is at the Father's right hand. But that isn't actually what it says in Greek. It doesn't say Jesus is at the Father's right hand. It says something that apparently made a Bible translator so uncomfortable that they chose to say something that was easier to say. Because what it actually says, what John actually said, is that Jesus is in the bosom of the Father. Jesus eternally reclining his head into the chest of the Father. And I don't mean this as a joke. That is the kind of thing that would make a lot of men uncomfortable. That level of closeness, that level of intimacy. And then it's this beautiful picture because at the end of the book, John, the guy himself, the guy that wrote that, is at the Last Supper with Jesus. And do you know what it says in the text? It says that John reclined his head into the chest of Jesus. Just like Jesus is with the Father, intimate love, John is with Jesus. And so what happened in John's life? He knew the greatest love that has ever been on this planet. And what did he do? He spent his entire life genuinely showing the love of Jesus. Some Bible scholars think that the Gospel of John and 1 John and Revelation, which are some of the books that John wrote, weren't even written until 30, 40, or 50 years after Jesus went to heaven. The significant impact of the deep, intimate love that John experienced with Jesus flowing out of him, genuinely showing love for the rest of his life until he was sentenced to live the rest of his life on an island alone. And he wrote this, "Beloved, let's love each other, because love's from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who doesn't love doesn't know God, because God is love." Saying if you don't show it, you don't know it. And I've been blown away in my 2 months here by the amount of love that this church has shown to people. And we have an opportunity this morning to show more love to more people because of the love that we have known. If you'll turn your attention to the screen, there's a video about that.